Hello everybody and welcome. This is a Legacy School Comprehension lesson for Year 6, Week 9. So we're getting pretty close to finishing up our comprehension booklet. After this one, we only have one left, but that'll give us a lot of extra free time to run through our literacy book. We're a little behind on it, but after we're done with comprehension, we'll have a lot more time to do the comprehension passages in there, and just like I said, move a little quicker. So you're going to be getting your comprehension booklets back tomorrow, inshallah, and you'll notice that for some of you guys, I've actually deducted a couple of marks for not writing incomplete sentences. So we talked about this in class at school a few times. You should absolutely be answering your questions in complete sentences. That information is actually included in the instructions as well. So please, for now on, try your best when answering questions and when doing your corrections to answer in full sentences. For your extension work, a lot of you guys are writing run-on sentences, and that is a passage which is just one super long sentence or maybe two super long sentences. That just won't do. So please work on your punctuation skills and the sentence where it needs to end. And with that said, let's go ahead and move on to our passage. Today we are just going to be looking at our comprehension booklet, page 32 to 34, or comprehension sheet 9. So today's passage is called Footsteps of an Astronaut. We're going to go read through it. We're going to discuss some of the new vocabulary and concepts, and then just answer the questions together. All right, so Footsteps of an Astronaut. Neil Armstrong trained for years to go into space. On the 21st of July, 1969, he became the first man to step onto the moon when he put his left boot on the surface and spoke the memorable words. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. So we have the word memorable here. So memorable is something that is not easy to forget. Like, for example, if you had a great holiday, we could say that holiday is memorable, something that you are always going to remember for the rest of your life. So Neil Armstrong was the commander of the Apollo 11 spacecraft on the most daring space mission of the 20th century. Daring means something that not most people would do. Something that is audacious, if you remember that word from our spelling list. Okay, to dare to do something. The early stages of the flight were very stressful and incredibly noisy. The first launch phase of Apollo 11, during the first launch phase of Apollo 11, Armstrong's heart reached the top rate of 110 beats per minute. So his heart was beating faster than usual, and that is because he was very stressed out. Apollo 11 was larger than any spacecraft that had gone before. It consisted of a command module which the astronauts traveled in, a surface module which provided power, and a lunar landing module for landing on the surface of the moon. So a module is a part of the spacecraft. An advantage of traveling in this space module was that the astronauts could move around more easily, and this was probably one reason why none of the Apollo 11 crew suffered injuries. Armstrong was especially pleased about this because as a child he suffered from motion sickness. So motion sickness is when you get a little bit queasy, you might need to vomit, you get an upset stomach when you are on a vehicle that is moving very roughly. A lot of people get this when they're on boats or maybe traveling on a pretty bumpy road. And even during the training so he suffered from motion sickness as a child, and even during the training for the space flights, he had sometimes felt ill after doing aerobatics. So aerobatics is a type of exercise that you do while you are floating around. So astronauts have lots of practice floating around in zero gravity simulators for when they're up in space. They do lots of exercises. So during the final descent on the moon, descent is a landing, You might hear that word when you're taking a flight. We're about to start our descent. We're starting our landing. Armstrong noticed that they were heading towards a landing area which he believed to be unsafe. He took over manual control of the lunar landing module, which enabled him to find an area to land that was less dangerous. So instead of automatically landing on a preset area, he manually guided the landing module to a place where he thought would be less dangerous. So when he was questioned later about his decision, he said in his own typically modest way that he was just doing what his training had taught him. Armstrong and his co-pilot Edwin Buzz Aldrin spent nearly 3 hours on the moon's surface collecting samples of rock and moon dust. Armstrong said later, "The sights were simply magnificent, the most incredible that I had ever experienced." The two astronauts also conducted scientific experiments during their walk. The third astronaut on the mission, Michael Collins, circled the moon in the command module, while Armstrong and Aldrin walked on the surface. Aldrin later said that neither he nor Armstrong were emotional people. He did admit, however, that after the landing, there was a brief moment, so there was a tiny moment, when they looked at each other, slapped each other on the shoulder, and said, "We made it." Aldrin later said that Armstrong was one of the bravest men that he had ever known. Why do you think he was brave? Is it because he went to the moon and nobody had been there before? They weren't afraid to be somewhere where it was risky and there were potential dangers and nobody had been there before? Or do you think there's another reason? All right, so an estimated 600 million people, which in 1969 was 1/5 of the world's population. So imagine 1/5 of the world's population watched or listened to the moon landing. In total, 12 American astronauts walked on the moon between 1969 and the final moon mission, which was in 1972. Alan Shepard became the oldest man to walk there when, at the age of 47, he commanded the Apollo 14 mission in 1971. Despite his age, so even though he was old, he was a strong man. And when he played golf on the moon, he joked that because of the lack of gravity, he could hit the ball for miles and miles and miles. As if you hit a ball on the moon, it technically never falls on the ground. It never lands on the ground. It keeps floating. So he joked that he could hit a ball for miles, which is very hard to do in golf. Only a very skilled golfer can do. And it's not even literally miles. It just means hitting it for a very long distance. Neil Armstrong was born in 1930, and he took his first airplane ride at the age of 6. He became fascinated with aviation. Aviation is the science of flying aircraft. And he built module airplanes and conducted experiments in the mechanics of flying. He joined the military as a pilot and then became an astronaut on the space program before teaching aviation at university. So first, he built model airplanes and conducted experiments, and then he later joined the military and became a pilot, and then an astronaut, and then after that, he became a teacher at university. So that's very, very impressive. He finally bought a farm in the 1970s and just raised cattle. So after that very exciting youth, he had a pretty modest life later on. He was a private person, rarely making speeches or giving interviews to the media. People who knew him and worked with him, however, said he was enormously proud of the achievements of the space program. He was happiest when flying and said in one rare interview, "Now and then I miss the excitement of being in the cockpit of an airplane and doing new things." So a cockpit is a very small room in any aircraft, where the pilots control the flight. So now that we have read the text and discussed the vocabulary, let's go ahead and look at the questions. Number 1, what was Neil Armstrong's role in the space mission? Number 2, when did Neil Armstrong's heartbeat become fast? Number 3, what made Apollo 11 different from all the previous spacecraft? Number 4, What was the benefit of the bigger command module? So here there were actually two main benefits. I want you to write both of them down. Number 5, when did Armstrong notice a possible problem during the space mission, and what was that? Number 6, how did the two astronauts spend their time during the moonwalk? Give 2 details. Number 7, what was the task of Michael Collins? Number 8, according to the article, when did the last lunar mission take place? Number 9, why was Alan Shepard able to hit a golf ball a long way on the moon? So we talked about that. Number 10, what was Armstrong's last job connected to flying? So his last job connected to flying, not actually flying an aircraft. The last job connected to flying. Number 11, what health problems did Armstrong have when he was young? Number 12, which part of the spacecraft is the cockpit? And number 13, explain in your own words what Neil Armstrong meant by saying, that's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Number 14, in paragraph 4, Neil Armstrong is referred to as a modest man. Find other examples or quotes in the text that describe his character. Explain fully what your examples mean. So for this one, you might need to think a little bit. Please do not answer these questions in a rush. We are taking marks, and I want to see you actually analyzing the text and finding information and adding your own opinions as well. Number 15, do you think that people were interested in the moon landing expedition? And explain what makes you think so. Number 16, explain the word aviation. And number 17, explain the word aerobatics. So those are 2 pretty easy questions because we already pretty much discussed them. And for extension work, we are going to write another summary. We've been writing lots and lots of them. Make sure when you're writing a summary, you're writing the main points of the text. What happened in the beginning, what happened in the middle, what happened in the end, if you are summarizing the story. And if you're summarizing an information text, write down maybe 5 or 6 of the main or the most important pieces of information from the text. All right? So if I have to get rid of lots and lots of information in the text, write down the pieces of information that you cannot stand to get rid of. Okay? So you're going to summarize the main point of the article in a maximum of 50 words. Okay? Make sure, so in a summary, we do not use lots and lots of description. Okay? So that's all we have for today, and good luck.